Gonzaga falls. Has Santa Clara hit a wall? Is St. Mary's back? Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A lot happened over the weekend, and we'll start getting into everything that happened, especially on Saturday, because there was a lot that went down that kind of changes the way that we're going to at least start to look at where we're going in the next few weeks. But before we get anywhere else, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, like and favorite on your favorite streaming service, follow on social media at Posts by Zach, and then also on Twitter on WCC Pod. So do all that. And where I'm going to start is probably the most surprising result of the weekend. And no, it wasn't St. Mary's. No, it wasn't Gonzaga. The most surprising result of the weekend was San Diego. And it was San Diego knocking off Arizona State at Jenny Craig Pavilion, 89-84. As I was watching a bunch of the game Saturday night, I was in Colorado for the St. Mary's Colorado State matchup, and that was a great night. I'll recap that in a bit. But as I got to a sports bar, was watching Gonzaga and Washington, and was keeping track of San Diego. And slowly, as we got deeper and deeper into the game, they were still in this. They're still in this. Oh my God, they actually could win this. They trailed by 12 in the first half. They went on a 13-0 run with 6:04 left in the second half. Took a 7-point lead in that. I mean, this was going down to the wire. They scored 61 second half points against Arizona State. Arizona State hadn't allowed any more than 40. And maybe the play of the game, like Deuce Turner was one of the keys in bringing them back, was really clutch in the second half. 23 points for the game. A lot of really clutch threes there to get them back into the contest. PJ Hayes with 13 of his 23 in the final 8:30 of that one. And Kevin Patton Jr., maybe with one of the early plays of the season for the WCC. With 24 seconds left, San Diego up by 2 at this point, inbounding the ball under their own basket. He bounced it off, Patton Jr. Inbounding the ball, bounced it off of an ASU player who had his back turned, stepped in bounds, collected, and just laid it up to give the Toreros a 4-point lead. One of the more heads-up plays you'll see. The broadcasters had it right. Schoolyard at its finest with that play. And I mean, man, like you have to be paying attention on an inbound play. You can't have your back to the inbounder. But San Diego played really well in that second half, played really well in that game. You could just see how much it meant to them in their post-game celebration. This was their first win against a Pac-12 team since 2018. Isaiah Pinheiro, 30 points in that one for those who can turn back the clock a little bit to that vintage of the San Diego Toreros. They're 7-4 now. And while vast majority of their wins are not all that impressive, they're not really much to look at, they're getting better. And offensively, that is still where they have struggled. It's largely been either it's Wayne McKinney or it's Deuce Turner. It's been one of those. And then maybe you see PJ Hayes come around. It has been Lungo at times. But this team seems to be gaining some confidence, and you're going to get a lot of confidence after this win from Saturday. So just congrats to the Toreros. Congrats to Steve Lavin and his coaching staff. This was a really impressive win to get at home against a Pac-12 team. May not be seeing Arizona State anytime soon after the return trip. This was the return trip of a home and home. So we'll see if any Pac-12 teams dare go into GCP anytime soon. I guess no Pac-12 team will, because there won't be any Pac-12. So the different story, different day. We'll talk about that probably in the off season. Well, then there was what was probably the the best result of the night for the WCC, and that was what I got to witness firsthand uh, in Fort Collins, Colorado, seeing St. Mary's knock off number 13 and previously undefeated Colorado State 64-61. This was a game that very much felt more like the St. Mary's team that we thought we would all see at the beginning of the year. And we did see obviously a little bit of that team when they played New Mexico, and they sort of they lost themselves there for a while. And what we saw on Saturday was the pieces that we knew had to step up for this team to be successful stepped up in a big way. Magoustas Marshallonis had a career high 18 points in that one, 8 for 11 from the field. Joshua Jefferson had 16 points, 13 rebounds. Those two were so clutch, so important to what St. Mary's was able to do. Aidan Mahaney only had 10 in that one. Mitchell Saxon had 7. But this was really a collective effort. Really probably maybe the first collective effort we've seen from this group all year. Even the New Mexico game was a heavy Aidan Mahaney performance. So this one felt more balanced. This one felt like you had contributions up and down the roster. And it didn't start that way. St. Mary's came out the gates almost very similarly to what we saw against Boise State. They were down 8-0 after the first couple of minutes. Randy Bennett called a timeout and really set this team straight. They went on a 19-2 run after that timeout. And then from that point, it was a tight game all the way through. You had 9 lead changes, 4 ties, and this was just a back and forth contest all the way through. And I want to focus on Marchion's a little bit more, because the performance he had, not only individually, but just what he was able to do against Isaiah Stevens, the likely to be an All-American point guard for the Rams. Went 6 for 16 from the field, 3 assists, 6 turnovers. Both of those last numbers were season lows for Stevens. And St. Mary's held this team to a season low 36% from the field. This is the 9th best offensive rated team in the country. And they held them to 36% from the floor. And Joshua Jefferson, who I talked about last week, just the struggles that he has had, especially with his shot. In this game, he was still, I thought, played with the shots he was taking, the shots he selected was still very similar to what we've seen, but they were finally starting to go down. He was playing the aggressor most of this game, and you just saw how pumped up he was. Like every time he came off the bench after a big play, like he was one of the guys just like pumping the rest of the team up, like yelling and screaming. Like you saw the energy out of him. You saw the energy out of Marshall. You saw this team was energized for the first time in a long, long time. And that was maybe the most exciting thing to see. And with Josh Jefferson, he hit what might have been the dagger for this game. With 2 seconds left in the shot clock, less than a minute to go, he caught an inbound pass and just unloaded a 3, hit that to give St. Mary's a 4-point lead at that point. This was something St. Mary's needed. This was even not necessarily the result. They needed to get that joy back. They needed to get that excitement back in that locker room on this team. And it was very evident after that game ended how just pumped up and excited that they were, almost to get the monkey off their back, that they're getting back on the track. They're going back in the right direction. I thought last week they looked better than they had the week before. And this week showed that they're looking like the team we thought they should have been all along. And that does bring up the question of, say, are they back? And what necessarily does that mean? It's like, are they back as far as a at-large contention? No, probably not. That might be a ways off if we ever get back to that point. But here's some things to look at. A week ago, when the net was first released, they were at 155. After the win on Saturday, they jumped up to 85. They jumped up a full 60 spots. They weren't at 155 going into Saturday, so they jumped up a full 60 spots with that one win at Colorado State. Colorado State was number 7 in the net, by the way, and that gives them another Q1 victory. And now look at this. In the next 5 games before WCC play begins, they have very winnable contests. Every last one of these should be, on paper, a win for St. Mary's. They're going to be traveling to play neutral site in Phoenix against UNLV. Then they'll be home for the next 4 after that: Middle Tennessee, Northern Kentucky, Missouri State, and Kent State. All of these are winnable games. All of these are, if they play like they did on Saturday, they will win all of these games. But that doesn't mean I think they need to play like they did on Saturday to win all of these games. I think that they can still work on some things. They can still improve in other areas, because I don't think it was not a perfect game on Saturday. There were plenty of things that they could have still done better. I still think that they struggled late in shot clock situations. I don't think they did that terribly well. A couple of shot clock violations that Colorado State forced. I don't think they really started to figure out that offense. They need to get off to better starts like that. Again, like, the offense took a while to get going. It took them getting an earful from the bench to get going. You can go down 8-0, 9-0 against a lot of these teams and think you're going to get away with it. But 5 winnable games going into conference play. They're 5-5 right now. They might be 10-5 by the time conference play begins. And so maybe they're back into the 60s by WCC play. And now you can start the conversation again. Now you can say, like, okay, maybe we can start to consider them once more in that WCC conversation, that at-large conversation. But I do still think my statement from last week still stands, is that this team is still not there, and I don't think you can make the assumption that they are going to get there, because there isn't a Q1 or a Q2 game left before non-conference ends. And then in conference, if you look at just where teams are currently, the only teams that would count as a Q1 or a Q2 as it stands are USF or Gonzaga. And now, I think the result from Gonzaga on Saturday does, I think, leave the window open. Does it mean that St. Mary's is going to be able to go in there and take a couple of them? That we're not going to go that far, but it does show, and we'll talk more about Gonzaga in a bit, that they're not as impervious to what the WCC is going to be this year than I think what we thought earlier on. And what this showed was the potential that the St. Mary's team has. It showed that when the pieces around Aiden Mahaney come to play, this team is still incredibly dangerous. And this is a good stepping stone. This is a good spot for St. Mary's to be able to jump off of and say, we're back in this. We can still do some damage. We can still get back to the tournament. Might it have to be a win in Vegas? Sure. But now, the way this team has played, the way that team looked on Saturday, there's no reason that that same team could not walk into Spokane and do the exact same thing. Speaking of Gonzaga, this Gonzaga team, and I talked about it last week, that, well, and it's been talked about a lot. I'm not the only one who said this. Depth and usage may be the two things that were going to come back to bite this team in the long run. And maybe it wasn't the long run, because the depth was tested on Saturday and it came back to bite Gonzaga. And really, to an extent, what we also saw was Gonzaga pulling a St. Mary's in the second half. And maybe they just passed off the poor second half bug to the Zags. Gonzaga ended up losing at Washington 78-73 in Seattle. That snapped a 16-game winning streak that Gonzaga had against Pac-12 schools. And they were up 10 with 13:47 left and ended up scoring 3 points after the 7:12 mark. The Gonzaga offense left them. It vanished. They really could not get anything going toward the end of that game. And this was so inexplicable for a team that we know is usually so good offensively and so efficient offensively, that it didn't seem like anybody was not like willing to take command, but nobody did take command of that game. Not Ryan Nembhard, not Nolan Hickman, not Graham Ike, not Anton Watson. Nobody could figure out how to get that offense going late in that game. That last 7-12, they went 1 for 11 from the field, 5 turnovers. And yeah, Washington is a better team than they were a year ago. They had some really good performances in the second half. They were the aggressor in the second half. Frank Kepning, who was just a monster for them defensively and on the offensive end, 14.7 rebounds. He had a massive block on Ryan Nembhard, who just looked like he was very lazily going in the lane and just did not see the shot blocker coming. A familiar name, familiar face, Moses Wood, the Portland transfer, 12 points, 4 for 9 from the field. And if you look at the box score, I think you would be almost thrown off by that second half statistic, because the Zags still had 10 players in double figure scoring. The shooting percentage was still not terrible. Like, you looked at overall, it's like the numbers were fine, a little sloppy, but fine. But then you dive a little deeper into what happened. Nolan Hickman scored 15 of his 17 in the first half, and did not score again after the 16:02 mark in that second half. Graham Ike was in foul trouble again, and that meant that we needed to see Ben Gregg a little bit more in that contest. Dusty Stromer picked up early fouls in that forced Jun Suk Yo to come in and play a few more minutes than he was normally used to. And it wasn't that he was bad, but he didn't stand out either. He had 2 points, both of them from the free throw line. And then again, bring up the usage rate of some of these guys. Again, Ryan Nembhard plays 40 minutes. Again, Nolan Hickman plays 40 minutes. Second time they've had to do it against a Pac-12 school. And Stromer and Yo combined for 2 points. Stromer did not score in this contest. One of his least, probably his worst game to this point of the season, which again, like, I'm not going to read too much into putting too much on a freshman to this point. But the flaws started to show up in this Gonzaga team. And if you can attack them, if you can really start to put some pressure on them, especially if you get them in foul trouble and test that depth, this is a team that doesn't have a lot of places to go. Even actually, even Nembhard had 4 fouls in this game, and that could have been someone. If you lose him from that roster, who's your point guard? Then you go back to Nolan Hickman being the point guard, and we saw what that looked like a year ago. Nolan Hickman's looked better in that 2 spot. It's better that he's there. But if something happens to either he or Nembhard, like right now, it's like, I don't know where you go. So Markview, I think, needs to find opportunities to get some of the guys on the bench some minutes. And I'm recording this on Monday, so that I know that they'll be playing Mississippi Valley State tonight, and that's obviously going to be a really good opportunity to get some of those other guys off the bench more minutes to be able to give them some experience, give them some time, because that's going to be key, I think, for Gonzaga as we get deeper into conference, and especially considering, well, take a look on Friday, a familiar face and a not so joyous memory. UConn heads to Seattle on Friday to take on Gonzaga, and we know what happened the last time those two saw each other. UConn has been continuing to roll ever since. This is going to be a very, very tough matchup for Gonzaga. I'm not terribly optimistic about their chances in that game, but it's going to be, I think this is going to be a harder challenge for them than even, say, Purdue was. And Purdue, because I think Purdue, to an extent, even though Zach Edey just eats up so much space and obviously can cause foul trouble, the dynamic that UConn brings is just so much different. The speed that they bring is so much different than what Purdue has. So I think that's going to be the challenge for Gonzaga. But really, it's they need to find opportunities to lengthen out that bench, because right now it's maybe 6. That's a 6-player, 7-player deep bench at the moment, and that's not going to get it done against some of these better teams. You're going to need that depth to really shine through, and it just hasn't done so to this point. But also, let's take a look at what their competition has done as well to this point. So let's not completely ignore what we've also seen from the rest of their opponents. That you look at what UCLA is now. UCLA, when I checked, was net 123. Syracuse was 95. USC, after their loss to Long Beach at home, I was just looking at it, they slipped down to 92. So even Gonzaga's better wins are not looking as good of wins anymore. So even right now, it's like they're 0-2 in Q1. They're 2-0 in Q2. They do have UConn coming in. That's a Q1 opportunity. They have San Diego State at home. That's a Q1 opportunity, at least for now. They will see Kentucky on the road in February, and that is also a Q1 opportunity. So it's not like that there aren't more chances for Gonzaga to start to pick up some more wins, but that is the extent of their non-conference Q1, Q2s. And they are right now 2-2 in those games with 3 to go. And I'm anticipating at least one more loss amongst that group. And if you were to tell me, if a team came in with a 2-3 record with Q1, Q2 and did not have a Q1 victory, is that a tournament team? I don't know. Probably a borderline one. You'd have to dig deeper a little bit into it. But right now, I'm not concerned about Gonzaga. I think they're going to figure it out, but I don't think that their resume is as bulletproof as I think we've once thought, as we may have thought it was earlier in the year, or at least the way it looked on paper. UCLA has not played well. USC has not played well. Syracuse is not going to be a. I don't think there might be a mid level at best ACC team. So, considering what's left on the schedule for them, I think they need some help. They need to help themselves more than anything. I'm not going to say they need help. They need to help themselves. And this Gonzaga team is going to still have plenty of tests left, a couple tests left before we hit the conference schedule. Then Kentucky is going to be that lone Saturday in the middle of conference play. And kind of on the flip side, the only Q1, Q2s left in conference play are going to be USF and St. Mary's at this stage. And we know that Gonzaga has typically dominated these matchups, but USF is not going to be a pushover. And that goes for both St. Mary's and for Gonzaga. Like, do not underestimate what this USF team is capable of doing. I think they're going to, I think they're getting better. I think that they're slowly starting to figure things out. They should not have lost that game in Arizona at Arizona State. But you can see that this team is growing, and as of right now, they might have the best player in the WCC. And I think that is at very much, we can have that conversation about Jonathan Mobo being right now the player of the year in the WCC. All right, USF was idle for most of the week, so we're not going to get into them. They do have a couple of big games this week, so as I'm recapping the previewing that, we'll talk more about USF. So lastly, I want to get into what has happened to Santa Clara. They were back to being fully healthy, or at least they were back to everyone being active on the roster on Saturday. They taking on New Mexico, a very good New Mexico team on a neutral site in Henderson, and dropped that game 93-76. They trailed by 20 at the half and just were absolutely dominated in the paint. They were dominated points off turnovers. Points in the paint 56-24, points off turnovers 27-16. Santa Clara had 26 turnovers in that ball game, and the starters just didn't show up. 23 combined points from the starters, 5 of 16 from the field, 18 turnovers. This was just not a good look for this squad, as we thought, especially coming off the Oregon win. Like, there was so much optimism, and I was one of those who, so like, here we go. Santa Clara is finally starting to come through. Even after the Ohio State loss, it was like, okay, it's fine. You get off that high, you reset, you'll get back to it. But there is a bit of a concerning trend when you look at some of those numbers. And specifically, I said points in the paint and points off turnovers. All of those have been problems the last 3 Division I games. In the Oregon game, the game they won, they led points in the paint 42-28. They led points off turnovers 16-2. Against Ohio State, they lost points in the paint 36-26. They lost points off turnovers 17-2. Against Cal, they lost points in the paint 40-30. They lost points off turnovers 17-8. Against New Mexico, just said it, 56-24 points in the paint, 27-16 points off turnovers. They've lost 3 of their last 4, and now go into a week in which they will see Utah State and Washington State. This might start, I mean, it's starting to not look great right now, and this has the potential to snowball quickly for Santa Clara if they don't figure out something this week. This Utah State is a good team. I think I looked at, like, they were 7-1, 8-1 right now. And we know that Utah State is usually somewhere in the Mountain West conversation. They will be again this year. Santa Clara did not do well against Utah State a year ago, so this was a year where it's like, hey, this might be a good get-back game for the Broncos. And the starters need to come through, and clearly you can see the spots that they need to be better in. They need to take care of the paint better. They need to protect the paint better. And that falls on the Johnny O'Neills, that falls on the Christoph Tillys, that falls on the Cafaros. Like, this really falls on that front court of the Broncos to really start to be better than they have been over the last few games. It falls on this defense collectively to really make sure that, one, they're taking care of the basketball, but then two, making sure that they're slowing teams down when turnovers are committed. Way too often they are being beat on these breaks, because, again, look at these numbers. It has not been a good way to go about for Santa Clara. 70-2, 17-8, 27-16. They're getting beat consistently in these two areas, and that has to change. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how well everybody else plays. If you're losing the turnover battle, if you're losing the battle in the paint, you're not going to win a lot of games. And right now, the Broncos are not. One note, and I will say this because, like, the one bright spot that did come out of that game for Santa Clara, Cameron Tongue, 16 points off the bench, career high. So I do want to give props to him, because, like, that he hasn't gotten a whole lot of playing time, and when he finally does, like, he did come through in a big way off the bench. All right. So a lot of good games this week, and I'm just going to highlight one of the games I think is UConn Gonzaga is definitely going to be the best game of the week. But the game of the week, the game I think is going to have bigger implications going into this one. I have to look at San Francisco going to Salt Lake City to take on Utah State. This USF team has 3 games this week. They will take on New Orleans tonight. They have Seattle U on Wednesday, and then they had travel to take on Utah State. USF is already 45, I think it was, in the net, and so they've already started to build the metric case. They now need to add the marquee win that they have yet to get. They've had some close calls, but they have yet to really pick up that win that really says they belong in the conversation. They just missed at Boise. They just missed against Grand Canyon. They did not play well against Arizona State. This game against Utah State could be that game where we see USF really start to come through and be the team that it does seem like that they have the potential to be. And it would do wonders for their confidence. It would do wonders for their metrics to be able to go to the neutral site that is going to be Salt Lake City. They'll be playing at the Delta Center in that contest. So that, to me, is the game of the week. And to me, they're also the team to watch because of that 3-game set, because of what they have to do. That Saturday is going to be crazy, not just for that game, but you have 4 WCC teams that are going to be in Phoenix playing all in the Jerry Colangelo Classic. Santa Clara taking on Washington State. You have LMU and Santa Barbara, St. Mary's against UNLV, and Portland against Grand Canyon. All those are going to be really fun games. All of them great opportunities for the WCC. It really is kind of just a WCC invitational. It's like early opportunity to see as many of the WCC teams at once in one location before we get to Las Vegas. All right, so this is going to be just a really exciting week for the WCC. That Saturday is going to be nuts. It's going to be really exciting. Probably just going to find a couch somewhere and just try to watch as many of these games as possible. Might be just mini mini NCAA tournament, just multiple screens all over, just watching that all Saturday long. All right. That'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, follow along on social media at Post by Zach, favorite and like on your favorite streaming service. Have a good week, everybody, and I will catch you later.